All right. Great. Thank you. I can manage letting people in and everything. Um, so my plan is to talk about all of the content I want to thoroughly, but also to try and leave some time for questions from everybody at the end. And as we're going along, if there's something I'm talking about and you feel like you have an urgent question, you can feel free to unmute and ask me the question. I'm happy to answer questions as we're going along too. Um, all right, so I think with all that said, I'm going to switch over to the PowerPoint by sharing that screen with all of you. Ah, yes, Susan reminded me that you can also type questions sometimes, which might be a little bit easier than managing the mute button by clicking on the chat icon down in the center, bottom center of your window, and then you can type questions to everybody or to me. All right, so I'm going to share the screen now. All right. So today, the title of my talk is Online Teaching, Equipment, Apps, and Approaches to Remote Piano Lessons. And in this talk today, I'm going to talk about types of equipment to use for online teaching that makes the most sense, and talk about the pros and cons of different types of devices, and talk a bit about setup, and talk about physical and mental health strategies for teaching online, talk about some applications, or apps as they call them now, briefly cover student equipment and setup, and then talk about adjustments to teaching methods and advice for other studio events like recitals or studio classes and that type of thing. So, the essentials for online teaching are to have an audio recording device and a video recording device. So you can transmit audio and video from where you are to where your students are, and that they can also send that back to you. And so that's like the replacement for in-person teaching. And I found that most of us who are able to do any online teaching usually have access to certain types of equipment. And those are usually either computers or tablets or smartphones. And so of those options, either a laptop, a desktop, smartphone, or tablet, I found that the ideal equipment are either a laptop computer or a tablet. With those, we have the most flexibility, balanced with large enough screen that we can see our students well. So laptops might be the most versatile because of how their basic setup is that you can take the screen and you can lower it and raise it to any kind of angle, so you can get a pretty good camera view of yourself no matter what type of surface or at what height you have to put your computer. One thing I found is that it tends to be better to have a camera angle that's level or even above, looking down a bit on where I am. But most of the flat surfaces that I have around my house, tables, TV trays, chairs, they're actually all kind of low, and it's hard to get that good high angle. What I do now, we'll see in a slide coming up, is I actually have a music stand that has a really good tightening system, so it's safe to put my laptop on it. And so I put that as high as it can, so it has an angle going down onto me. But before I got that music stand, I was using this TV tray that you can see here in this photo. And this is, it's a TV tray, it's not very high, but I could tilt the screen back so that the camera could take in as optimal an angle of me as I can. Um, the other type of computer, phone, tablet thing that's best is a tablet, like an iPad or other type of tablet. And this is my tablet. For musicians, it's generally best to get the largest size available, um, because for one thing, if you there's multiple uses you can make with a tablet for music making. One of them is for doing video calls for remote lessons. Another one is for using it to read music on using it on the iPad itself. For both of those things, the largest screen you can get, the better. And if that's an investment you want to make, generally the price difference, the larger iPads are more expensive, but not by so much that it you know, for me it made sense to get the largest size, even though it was somewhat more expensive than the smaller size that's more popular. The larger size is heavier and it's harder to hold for a long time, but generally we're not actually holding them in our hands. We have various types of stands or tripod fixtures that we use for securing the iPad. So looking at this photo here, this is my iPad in its normal iPad holder. And this iPad cover that also doubles as a stand, this is designed to serve as something that helps us to read if we have the iPad on a table in front of us. It's not very good. You don't have very much control over what kind of angles you can get for the webcam that's on the iPad. And because of that, it's less flexible in this form than the laptop, where you get much more control over exactly how you want to angle the camera attached to it. Because of that, if you have an iPad or other tablet and you have one of these types of cases that doubles as a stand, you'll probably find that it doesn't create a very good angle for teaching. For that, if you're using an iPad for teaching, what I would really recommend is getting a tripod and then an iPad holder that you can attach onto the tripod. That way you can get the same type of flexibility of the camera angle to get an optimal view of yourself teaching. And so, So here with the tripod, you can obviously raise it and lower it quite far, and then the iPad holder allows you to angle the iPad in many ways, even some that do seem slightly dangerous at first, like tilting it down slightly. As long as everything is tightened and secure, the iPad will be safe. This is more of a preference issue than an absolute necessity, but if we think about a typical laptop, the webcam is right in the center above the screen. And that means that when you are looking at the camera, you're more or less looking at the student who's also looking at the camera on their device. On the iPad, especially the large size, the webcam is actually over here. So this is where the power button, like the home screen button is. Over here is where the camera is. And so I found back when I was using my iPad for video conferencing, which now I'm using my new laptop instead. I'll talk more about that in a second. It always felt slightly disconcerting because if I was looking at the student who was in the center usually of the screen, to them it looked like I was looking off to the right or left, depending on whether they had the screen mirrored or not. iPads are still great in general. The one issue with a large sized iPad is that the iPad holder, like this one here, there are no iPad holders made for attachments to tripods that are large enough to hold a 12.9-inch iPad vertically. So we always have to put it on horizontally, and that means that the camera angle gets a little bit off. And that might seem like it's a minor issue, but as I'll talk about later, I think with remote teaching, it places different kinds of stresses on us, physical and emotional, psychological stresses. And so I find it's best to try and make the experience as normal and smooth as possible, at the most like an in-person lesson as possible. And even small things like that can take a toll over time, like just the little stress of feeling like you're looking in the wrong spot or feeling like you're not quite communicating as directly as you could. So at this point, for me, in my online teaching, I find using a laptop to be the best course of action. And like I said, I'll show a photo of this later on. I put my laptop up high on a music stand that's very secure so that the angle is more down. And I find that it's easier to frame everything when you're doing that, so that you can see, the student can see my face, the student can see my torso and my arms and my hands, both hands, and they can see the keys. If you have the camera directly next to you or even lower than you, then usually, especially if you have it to your right side, your right hand's just going to tend to block view of your left hand. If you have the camera angle higher, then from that vantage point, you can see both hands much more easily. And so the higher you can get the camera, generally the better the view that you can give to the students. Okay, so non-ideal equipment for online teaching would include smartphones. So, tablets and smartphones that really are they're pretty much the same type of technology, but smartphones are much smaller. And the small screen, I find, is a real impediment to doing good teaching. This larger screens, like on typical laptops or large tablets, you can still see enough detail that you can tell what fingering a student is using, how their finger shape is, whether they're collapsing their arch or what they're doing with their wrists. And with a tiny smartphone, which you can see here is my iPad, and then here is my old iPhone, and it looks so tiny in comparison, you can imagine trying to look at the details of what your student is doing at the piano on this tiny screen. It can be really, really difficult to do that. And especially if many of you are teaching younger children, it's even harder to compensate for a small phone. I teach a number of adult students, and if necessary, I can ask them questions like, what fingering are you using? Are you collapsing your wrists? Like if the video's quality is not good for some reason. And generally adults, they can more or less tell you what they were doing. But if you have younger children, it might be really hard to get them to answer questions like that. Which means the more detail you can see, the better teaching you can do in the process. So the small screen is the biggest issue. It's usually more difficult to set up the correct camera angle, like I was talking about earlier with a smartphone. However, in a pinch, a smartphone can work as a backup, especially, I said for faulty audio here. What I meant actually was faulty video, meaning sometimes if internet connections are really bad, especially on your students, and the lesson can still be relatively productive if you have to switch to audio only. I know that can't work with every single student, but with in my experience, and I mostly teach intermediate and advanced students, if you have to go to audio only, you can still give a lot of information and a lot of teaching on, especially on musical issues, especially if you feel like you can communicate with a student and you have a shared language of technique, like fingering numbers and wrist motions and all that kind of stuff. So smartphones can work well in a pinch as a backup, so you don't have to cancel a lesson if the internet is too slow for the video stream. And then the other, um, the final common type of computer thing that people have is desktop computer. And desktops are also not very ideal, um, unless you have a studio setup where you can really position the desktop computer in a way where it would function kind of like the laptop would. But generally, desktops are at their own table or desk. They tend to not be near the piano. Even if they're in the same room, they tend not to be like directly across from the piano. Like I said, if you can rearrange your space, that's a lot cheaper than buying a new computer. Um, but with desktops too, they tend to be very wire based, and all the wires and cables can create trip bait, and that gets even worse if, say, you need to try and send a lot of wires from one room to another room in your house or your studio. If you already have it in your studio, that is a possibility. Um, some people who have fancy desktops in another area, you can sometimes get a external web camera that you can set up and run the cable to your desktop, and that's okay for sending out video and audio. But then the challenge is being able to see your student if the desktop's monitor is far away. So desktops, they could work, but generally they have a lot more issues, a lot more problems of getting the setup correct. Like I said, if you already have a desktop and you feel like you could rearrange things, that's a lot cheaper than a new computer or a new iPad or something. Um, but if you are considering investing in some new technology, as our online teaching keeps going on and on, I would definitely consider a laptop or a tablet instead of a desktop, um, if you're going to move in that direction. Okay, so some other equipment that I find really useful and necessary are headphones and earbuds. So one of the biggest challenges in doing online teaching is getting good enough sound and good enough visual information to feel like you can really engage with what your student is doing and feel like they are seeing you well enough and hearing you well enough to engage with you. Um, and with Skype and Zoom and other video conferencing applications, they have various algorithms and programming processes that process sound and sometimes compress it in ways that treat the piano like it's noise. And it can you don't always have full control, which is one of the stresses in the situation, because you can set up on your end really well, and then you can ask your students or their parents to set up their computer situation well. It doesn't mean that they can or actually will. So sometimes you might send out great signal to them, but what you're getting back from them is very spotty or very degraded sound. Whether they're sending you really good sound or whether it's more degraded, and sometimes it's just up to whether the internet is being slow on a day too. Headphones and earbuds really help hear the sound much better, even if the sound quality is on the low side, because it isolates your hearing from the rest of your room, your studio, your environment, and you can hear more details even if the quality is not very good. Whereas if you're relying on external speakers, like on your laptop or on your tablet or from wherever, then the fidelity is much lower. So I find that using headphones or earbuds is really useful. So what I use are these Sony studio monitors, and they have a cable, and I'm wearing them right now actually. And what I like about them is that the cable is very full, and so you can stretch it way out, and basically it can stretch up to 12 feet almost. And having a very nice flexible cable like that on headphones is helpful. So if you need to go maybe grab a score off of your shelf while you're teaching or do something else, you can leave your headphones on And because the cable stretches, you don't have to worry about pulling your laptop onto the floor or something. That can also happen if maybe you just catch your foot on the cable or something. It won't be as dangerous. Um, yeah, obviously nowadays a lot of wireless headphones are being made, with Bluetooth headphones and Bluetooth earbuds, and I think those can work well too. Um, I think depending on how elaborate your audio setup is, there could be your computer could get overloaded with different types of audio signals that are coming in if you have something like a Bluetooth headset. But we'll talk more about that later. Um, so I think if you feel comfortable with your current setup with your headphones or whatever you're using, that's okay. I find that the lessons improve a lot in quality, um, and also in how they feel for me as a teacher when I have headphones on to keep the sound, um, even when the sound quality through the internet is very low, the headphones help with that. And the flexible cable really helps both in moving around the studio. It also helps make it easier to play, to demonstrate things on the piano, because the cable is very flexible and you can move it out of the way. And even if it's up resting on your arm, it's not a big impediment or anything. So nowadays, when I teach, I actually use both my laptop and my iPad for different purposes. So here's a photo from the side of my piano, and this is how I typically have my equipment set up. So I have my music stand here, my laptop's on the music stand, and you can see how the monitor is tilted down and the camera's here, so I get kind of a view from above at an angle. And it's also close enough that when I'm talking to my student, I can still see really well on the screen what they're doing, what's going on. Over here on my little TV tray table, I have my headphones resting on my iPad. So how I use my iPad during lessons, so with my students right now, like I said, all my students are intermediate to advanced, basically. I have a few beginners, but they're adults. And so in general, I find for me it's easier, like if I want to give my students fingerings or expressive tips or articulations or anything like that, I find it works best for me to tell my student what to do and for them to write it on their own score at their piano. Other teachers I know have used tablets and used apps on tablets like Fourscore or other applications like that meant for reading music and writing on the tablet on the music. You can also create scans of your students' music and have a fresh copy each week. And then you can use the tablet, especially if you get the Apple Pencil or the tablet pencil thing that lets you write on the screen, you can write in fingerings yourself. And then after each lesson, you can send those scores to your students or to their parents as PDFs so that you can, just like you would at a in-person lesson, you'd write on their score, you can use an iPad and apps there to write fingerings and other things on their score and send it to them. Personally, I don't do that as much because most of my students I have now I've had for a while, and we already had a rapport and a way of talking about all that stuff where I tended to have them write their own stuff down even in person, just so they got practice doing that. So when we switched over to virtual lessons, I found I could rely on that and keep doing that. Sometimes that gets a little bit tedious because you have to be much more precise about how to talk to them about that. You have to say like in measure 3 and beat 3, second 16th note, put the fingering number 3. And sometimes you have to say that information a couple times just so that they really get it in the right spot. And if you are worried they haven't, you can always have them hold the score up to the camera and you can just verify that they've written whatever you wanted them to write down correctly. So both of those work well. I imagine if I had more beginners who were younger, I'd want to just write things down for them. So that's one really good use of the iPad. I tend to use the iPad for creating practice sheets for my students. So each lesson I make a unique practice sheet for that week, and I use Microsoft OneNote application on my iPad. So each week I can create a custom table where I put in the number of days of the week that they're working, usually at 7, but sometimes I can adjust that if they're going on vacation or something. And then for the rows, I put in, if they're playing Hanon and scales, and then for their pieces, I can put down very precise practicing segments if they need that. Or for my more advanced students, I just give them general goals for them to figure out. And then I send that to my students right after each lesson. I was already doing that before the pandemic using my iPad. So it was easy to transfer that over. I used to, when we first started doing the pandemic teaching remotely, I had this reversed because I had an older laptop from 2011, and I was using my iPad for the video on the tripod, and I had my old laptop here to create those practice sheets. But that old laptop died, and so I got a new one, and I realized that it made more sense to switch it the other direction with my new setup. So you can, I know it's a little steep to have both of these things, but if you do have both, you can take advantage of both, and it's really helpful in making the whole process easier. And you can experiment yourself with what setup makes more sense, having the laptop be the camera or having the iPad be the camera, whatever helps, makes it feel more like how you normally teach. Okay, so I wanted to talk about this a little bit. Since this is going on for a long time, some teachers and even some students are interested in getting even better audio quality for teaching. Like even through Skype and Zoom, you have some control over how they compress the sound, but even using those options, it can still distort and not make it sound much like a real piano. So I wanted to briefly talk about ideal audio setups. And this is definitely getting quite a bit pricier to get all this equipment. I already had a lot of this stuff because I make recordings of my performances, and so I was investing in some of this nicer audio equipment. But if you want to broadcast a really, really nice sound from your studio for teaching, what you would need would be at least a pair, like 2 condenser microphones that you would put inside your piano, one over the low strings, one over the high strings, and then a lavalier mic for your voice, and that's one of those microphones that they attach to your shirt or your whatever, and so those 3 microphones would then be put through the mixer. Let me see if I can. Okay, and the mixer takes all the signals from the microphones, and you can balance them so you get the right levels, the right volume for all the sound, and then put it through a USB audio interface, which connects to the computer. So that's expensive to purchase, and it adds a lot of time to your setup, especially if you are in a situation where you need to set up and tear down all of your stuff each day. I put this back to this. For me, that's my case, because my wife and I live in a relatively small house, and my studio is also the living room. So if I have all these microphones and cables out, I have to put them all away. So even though I have the equipment for this, I generally don't actually set up for lessons this way. Though sometimes I think about doing it just so my sound is better. And then you would need the various audio cables to connect everything. Troubleshooting is definitely required for getting all the audio levels properly set and for making sure everything works out okay. I'd say if this is interesting to you, I think it's ideal if you can leave your setup in place over multiple days. So if you can leave the microphones and the mixer and all these things out set up, that saves a lot of time. And if it really matters to you to have a really clear, non-distorted piano sound, then this kind of setup could be something worth looking into. I'm not going to go into all the details right now, about that. But it's because it's somewhat complicated and expensive. But I know some of us really like, we save up, get our nice grand pianos, have our great studios, and then we want that sound to be there. And so this is the way to do that, because you would create one signal that would then be put into the computer, and that which could be broadcast through Zoom or Skype or whichever thing, without the need for those programs to do any of their compression or anything. So that's basically the way around those applications' ways of distorting sound. If anybody's interested in that, you can send me an email and I can send you a more detailed list of all the stuff that I have for myself that I got for my setup. I use this setup at my church. I'm a music director because we're broadcasting music from the church during our Zoom services. So I already have the list made because another church asked me for my setup. So I already put that work in. So if you're interested, just send me an email and I'll send you that document for more details. Okay, so these are just some photos of what I was just talking about. So this is my piano, and here are the two condenser mics. And they're on microphone boom stands. And so one of them here is over the lower strings, and one of them is over the higher strings. Now, just these two microphones, when they're balanced correctly, get actually a really nice sound. They're not nice enough to make a professional recording, but they're surprisingly good with just these two mics. And so those two mics, the cables, they go down here on the floor and they come over here to this thing, which is the audio mixer. It's kind of a scary looking machine. These cables come into here, and then right here it's a little small, but this is the input for the lavalier mic that then comes over here, and then I would be wearing it at the piano. And then down here, there's a lot of different knobs you can fiddle with, but the important ones are here. These are the levels. And so you adjust these so that the balance sounds right. And then once that's all set, you take these cables, come out of the mixer, and they go into this, which is called a USB audio interface. What this is, it's a machine that allows you to connect the audio from this to the laptop using this USB cable. And once you have this kind of thing attached, then when you're in Skype or Zoom, you can hover over your microphone app, and you can easily switch what audio source that you're coming from, either your built-in microphone, or you can use the audio interface to connect. So this is expensive, complicated, takes a while to learn how to use. But like I said, if it's valuable to you, if you really want the sound to be really nice, it might be worth looking into. And I can send you more info about that. Okay, so here's that photo again of my setup. And a good rule of thumb for the setup is to put your equipment roughly where you would normally be. Imagine the camera is like literally your eyes, and then that's a good place for you to place everything. The camera should see the keyboard, hands, torso, and face, so that you can, because all those things are important for piano playing. It's hard to necessarily get the feet in there. If you can, that's good. But you definitely want to see keyboard with both hands. That's why the upper angle going down is really useful. Your torso and your face, your arms, those kinds of things. Okay, so I have a section on various kind of physical and mental health challenges that I've encountered in remote teaching that are different from in-person teaching. So I'm going to go through some of those and some of the things that I've thought of. So for physical health, one challenge is a very unusual sitting posture for teaching. So if we go back one frame, so you can see here, there's the camera on my computer, the bench is over here, here's the piano, and because of where this is, I often find myself sitting astride my piano bench looking at the computer a lot during the lesson. And so that's a very unusual way of sitting. And especially a bad habit that I sometimes I'm trying to deal with now is I don't take the time to swing my leg over and sit facing the piano directly. I'll just kind of turn my hands to the side and play something. And that, of course, is really horrible posture and really, and sometimes like even I'll just demonstrate simple scale and later on my like muscles will be a little bit sore and I'm like, oh yeah, it's because I tried to play it sideways. And so um, I think taking the time to always just turn to the piano is a good demonstration for the students anyway, because if your students are like mine, they're often turned towards me because they're kind of waiting for me to give them signs of approval or whatever. And I often have to remind them to just face the piano square on for better posture and everything. Um, so I think remembering that it's okay to take a little bit of time. I often find the reason why I don't turn to face the keyboard is when I'm teaching online, I feel more of a sense of anxiety that I not waste any time. In-person lessons, it feels like you can have more kind of downtime, so to speak, or dead time, where nothing precisely is actually happening, even though sometimes things are happening, like you're waiting for a student to answer a question or something. With online teaching, it feels like there's a pressure to be performing almost for the video. I think it's okay to remember to just take the time to move, play, and then come back, and to have some trust that your student's going to be paying attention during that time. And it helps a lot too with some of the physical stresses of playing like that. I find it also helps because, you know, if you're just in one strange sitting position the whole time, you can get stiff in other ways too. So it's good to move your body a little bit whenever possible. Which brings us to less movement of the body overall. So for in-person lessons, you know, I find myself getting up, moving around, going to the piano to demonstrate things, sitting next to the student to do duets or demonstrations, just moving around more. And so that helps relieve the stress to the body of just sitting in one place for hours on end. With online lessons, even with a really ideal camera setup, it's like if you stand up, usually the camera will just cut your head off from the view. And so if you're conscious about staying on frame, you feel like you need to just stay in that box, and it can be very restricting and cause tension. I find it's helpful to deliberately build in some physical action, either during or between the lessons. So, like with the students, you can involve some calisthenics or little light exercise stretching to help as part of their warm-up. And you can take part, so that helps you a lot, especially good if you schedule your lessons back to back, if you're teaching like 3 or 4 hours straight in a row. And then if possible, if it works for your schedule, just adjusting it slightly so that there are short breaks between lessons. Short breaks where you can move around a little bit, even just 5 minutes can give a good amount of time. And that's if you have flexibility with your student schedules to put a little extra space between each lesson. Okay, and then there's things I think of as sort of mental health challenges of teaching online. Challenge, online teaching is more stressful than teaching in person. And overall, I tend to find that to be the case. The virtual connection is not as deep and meaningful as the in-person connection you get when you're teaching people. And virtual connections, like the video and audio, is contingent on equipment and the internet working properly, unlike in-person lessons, which can carry on under most circumstances. So that means like you can be, it's very stressful when feel like you're conveying some really important information, maybe even being like inspiring, and then your student's like, oh, I didn't hear that because you froze. And it's very stressful. It takes certain resilience to recover from that and try and say the same thing again. And virtual connections are simply very different than the normal type of piano teaching, and that by itself can be quite upsetting and stressful. especially if a lot of us are in this profession because of the way the work itself works. Like being able to work with students in person and just the whole setting is part of what we like about it. Now is very different. It's not like that, and that can be stressful. So some potential solutions, I think, is accepting the differences and adapting what we can. I think it's easy for us to feel like if we get stressed out by this new way of teaching, that's our fault for failing to adapt and be strong. I find it helpful to remember that we're living in a worldwide pandemic that's disrupted so many aspects of our lives, and that it's okay to feel like we're trying our best in this very unusual and difficult situation, and that we're still doing really good work by teaching music, and continuing that even though we have to make adaptations. I find that attitude helps a lot in handling things that are more stressful about online teaching. I think I've learned to accept and be prepared for having to repeat myself much more than I would in person. And I don't really like repeating myself personally, but it's one of those things you have to. At least I feel like if I have it in my mind that I'll just have to do this at some point, then it feels less stressful when it does come up. Okay. Another challenge. Technology is stressful and confusing. It can sometimes feel like technology should be easy to use, but it isn't. And I think we get all kinds of messaging from our culture, our society, like a lot of commercials, for instance, that are marketing the new computer, the new technology, the new phone, the new whatever, and it seems like this technology is just going to solve all our problems and make us feel better. And technology itself is challenging to use. And while it's useful, they're tools, and it's like a computer or the internet. It's not like a hammer. If you get a hammer, it can be useful for driving in nails, but if you don't use it the right way, you can hurt yourself with it too. And I think acknowledging that technology is difficult can be helpful just in approaching it in the first place. And realizing that we get messages that somehow this should be easy, but in reality, it's not easy. And if we have that attitude approaching it, I think that really helps in shifting our mindset so that we go into problem-solving mode rather than feeling like this should just all kind of flow and fit together right away. So technology being stressful and confusing is also the case. It adds stress to teaching because there are many more steps that we need to do in order to teach than compared to teaching in person. And most of those steps have to do with setup, whether it's setting up accounts on Skype or Zoom, or setting up our computer or tablet, setting up our studio space with the right framing. It's a lot of extra steps to do. And because it's so different and there's so many more steps than usual, it can feel very rushed to set everything up in order to start teaching on time. And this one might seem like real common sense to some of you, but for myself, I sometimes still forget that if I'm going to start teaching at 1:30, when I'm teaching in person, often I can just start getting my studio set up at like 1:20 and it's fine. But if I wait that long to set up my computer and everything, then I'm rushing and it feels really stressed because I realize I need more time, and I forgot again that it takes longer to set up for remote lessons than in-person lessons. So I find one of the really crucial solutions for this is to create a checklist for yourself of equipment setup and takedown. And that can also include items like how to log into Skype and how to set up meetings and everything. If you put everything down on a piece of paper and you have the steps listed in order, that you can just follow the checklist and say, like, I need to do this now, then this, then this, then this. That can take a lot of the stress out of the setup and takedown of all the equipment and of the apps and programs. That list is something that you'll probably have to generate for yourself, observing or thinking about what you need to do to set up for yourself. But once you have that list, and you should feel totally fine to make the list as detailed and specific as you want. If it's important to include items like set up laptop, plug in headphones, that's totally fine. Whatever you feel like you need to make it really clear to yourself about what you need to do to get everything set up, that checklist will be really helpful, because then if you just go through the list, you'll know that you'll have set everything up correctly, and teaching will be less stressful. Once you have that list, it's good to actually time yourself, or get somebody who's in the house with you to time you with a stopwatch to see how long it takes you to set everything up. And once you have that time, and it might be 15 minutes, it might be 20 minutes, it might be 5 minutes, however long it takes you to do that, I'd say add 5 minutes onto that time, and then that's a good gauge for where to start or where to schedule in your setup. So for me, I find it takes about 15 minutes to set everything up for my teaching. So if I'm starting to teach at 1:30, I have in my schedule that I start setting up at 1:10, because even if having the extra time helps make it feel less stressful and less rushed, even when I have my checklist and everything. I think especially if some of you feel really intimidated by technology, the checklist can be really good. And maybe if you have somebody like maybe one of your children or somebody helps you with technology, they can help you create the list for yourself. Okay. And then another challenge is finding online teaching more tiring and draining than in-person teaching. And this is kind of related to the previous two, but I find it's somewhat different sometimes. Being in different physical spaces makes it harder to maintain authority, especially with young children sometimes. I feel like I can imagine, I don't have any really young children right now, but I can imagine there's just kind of anxiety that if you have like teaching a 5 or 6-year-old, that they might just leave and wander off and there's nothing you can do about it. And so being in different spaces does make it harder to maintain that sense of authority. Sometimes, like, you have to work harder to either to entertain or to make them interested or to get more discipline, depending on what you feel like is necessary at the time, than you would if they were in person. It can also feel like you need to maximize your lesson time with talking, whereas in-person lessons can have very useful stretches where there is more downtime. I think I mentioned this earlier a bit, where like in-person lessons, it feels like it's much safer. You can ask a question to the student and then you can like wait for a minute while they think about it. That feels very different for online teaching. Like if you ask a question, it feels like waiting that long amount of time feels like it could be much riskier. Like the student might just lose interest and leave or something. So that's the kind of thing where, if you know your student's okay with that kind of thing, you can try it. But in general, it just makes it a little bit more stressful to deal. There's a very different kind of interpersonal relationship involved over the internet. So these are more things that they're hard to just fix or get rid of. They're just parts of the stress of teaching online. So for solutions here, these are more about managing our stress level, managing our emotions. If possible, it's good to rearrange your teaching schedule in a way that helps you conserve your energy. I know some people who teach in-person lessons, sometimes they like to teach long stretches over a couple of days. Maybe even 6 or 7 hours. I've heard of people doing that. Um, but that is because it's in person. And then when you're teaching online, that becomes much more draining. And it might make sense to think about having like a COVID-19 schedule where instead you might distribute fewer lessons over more days, if that works for you, as a way to help with the stress. And that's really up to your individual, what you know about yourself and everything. Some people might find going the other direction is better, that they just, if they teach 16 hours of lessons a week, it's less stressful for them to get that all done over 3 days packed in rather than spreading it over more days or something. So just thinking about that for yourself is a different answer for everybody. I think remembering to schedule and prioritize social time with family and friends, either in person or social distanced or remote, can really help your spirit to recover a lot from the increased stresses of teaching. And I think also engaging in compassionate self-care, like exercising, meditation, hobbies you have, time in nature, and especially now, well, it's still nice a lot of the time. It's good to do that. All those kinds of things help to manage and mitigate these kinds of stresses. Okay, so I'm going to talk briefly about apps. So these are like the video streaming applications for video conferencing for lessons. So I feel like the priorities for teaching piano lessons or music lessons are about quality of sound and ease of use. Many apps are specifically attuned to the human voice, so they cut out noise like a piano sound or other instruments. Now, in general, the more control an app offers, the harder it is to learn to use. And that's because the more control, there's more things you can change, and you have to learn how changing those settings changes the outcome and all that kind of stuff. Best overall for teaching, I find, is either Skype or Zoom. Skype, I think, has the best balance of sound control to the ease of use of the application. Zoom has better control of sound, but it is somewhat harder to set up and use. Skype's the easiest of these two to use and learn. Has decent audio compression that allows for piano sounds to be heard relatively faithfully. That includes some limited ability to adjust how the sound is compressed. And if in Skype, that is something that you can take care of by going into the settings and into the audio portion. And basically, if you turn off the noise cancellation, turn off the echo cancellation, then you get a sound with more fidelity to what's actually there. If you have multiple microphones, you can switch between them in Skype. If you have multiple cameras, you can switch between them in Skype too. So that's very useful. In Skype, you can have text chatting. You can share files with your students. Like you can send them PDFs during the lesson if they're set up to see them. You can, if you want them to see or hear a recording, you can even send files through Skype. You can schedule meetings in advance, and you can also record and send audio and video messages to your students. In Zoom, it's somewhat more complicated than Skype, but the audio controls are even stronger. And since I gave this talk before, they've created a high fidelity music mode. And that might sound exciting for teaching, but I find that it's a little risky for teaching because even though it might improve the sound of the piano, it will distort the sound of your voice. And so it's a 6 up, half dozen the other kind of thing. It's really meant more for musicians who are like trying to stream performances where all they're doing is playing their instrument or singing to get that best kind of sound. In Zoom, there's some difficulty because the students also need to make adjustments on their end for this to work. And sometimes they can do that, sometimes their parents can do it, and sometimes they can't figure it out, and sometimes they just don't do it. Skype, like Skype, Zoom also offers other useful functions like sharing files, text chatting, scheduling meetings in advance, and recording the lesson, also recording messages. FaceTime and Google Duo, I think Google Duo may be defunct and replaced with Google Hangouts by now. In either case, I find these less good. They have less control over the sound quality. Their compression isn't very good for the piano, and they tend to give you less control over what's going on. So if you use those, I'd consider at least putting some time into trying out Skype or Zoom. If you like FaceTime or Google Hangouts for their ease, then maybe Skype might be the best thing to try. If you're concerned about sound, it might be worth it to use Zoom. Okay. So for using Skype, you'd want to download and install Skype, and I think I'll have Susan Todd make the PowerPoint available for all of you, so you can click on the link to get all that stuff if you don't have this already. And then you set up yourself an account with Skype, and with Skype, what that really means is you're setting up an account with Microsoft. So if you already have an account with Microsoft, like a Microsoft Office situation, then that's what you would use to access Skype, since Skype is owned by Microsoft. And then once you have it set up, you can search for your students' screen names or email addresses, or have them search for you to add them on so you can start calls with them. And then you want to schedule a trial call to test the settings, but make sure that if you do a trial call, that it's with somebody who's not in your house, not on the same internet connection as you, because if you're on the same internet connection, that will mess with how the bandwidth works. You want to have a test call with somebody outside your house on a different internet connection. And then I have, for Zoom, it's similar. You want to download and install Zoom and set up a free account in Zoom and go through the same process of scheduling a test call. For setting up lessons with your students, Skype is more like an analog to like a phone, like a telephone where you call somebody, even though you can schedule it in advance. On Zoom, it's more about creating like a virtual meeting. So you can create them at the time or schedule them in advance, and then each meeting has its own unique codes and passwords, and you can email that information or text it to your students. So in Zoom, if you use Zoom and you're curious about the audio setup options, what you want to do first is go to the settings, and the settings is sometimes it has the word settings, and sometimes it's like a little gear, like a little, looks like the icon's a little gear. If you click on that, it'll bring up a window. On the left-hand side, there's a list of different options to look at. And then there's one that's audio. I think it has a headphone icon. And you can click on audio. You scroll to the bottom of the box, and there's a little little thing that says advanced settings. You click on the word advanced settings, and then it brings you another box, and then you can change audio settings there as desired. And that's where you would find, say, the high fidelity music mode, and also the echo cancellation modes. If you're in a Zoom meeting, in the upper left-hand corner of the window, there's, not this window, but there's a built-in button there that you can quickly switch between what they call original sound and compressed sound. So original sound will make your piano sound more like it normally would, but it might also amplify echoes in your room that the computer picks up too. But that's a nice quick way to go between those things. For student setup, their setup ideally would be quite similar to your setup. And that's where you have a lot less control, because with students, basically they have to make use of what they already have, what their parents have, and you can't necessarily always get your students to have an ideal setup. So you may have to work with them to do the best that they can. Some of my students still use their iPhones for lessons with me, which is unfortunate, but their families aren't really in a place to get new computers right now and that kind of stuff. I find it's really important to have your students use headphones, earbuds. It's really good for the sound quality, like we talked about before, but also for privacy. One of the big issues now is everybody's stuck at home all the time, and And just like in lessons you'd have at your studio, you may feel like the student doesn't really want the parents hovering during the lessons. But when everybody's stuck at home, the parents are just there too. And maybe their siblings are there, maybe other family members are living with them. Having headphones or earbuds helps create at least some sense of privacy for the student so that they feel like they're in a different sound world, at least, from the rest of their family. And it's easier to keep their attention and for them to feel like they aren't being like monitored by their parents or anything. But you do want to make sure that your student doesn't use, if they have headphones, avoid headphones that have the attached mouthpiece, the attached microphone, because that really distorts the piano sound. And that's a kind of technological mess that's really hard to sort out with a student over the internet. For apps, they'll need the same apps that you're using. You might want to test with the parents to make sure that all that stuff works in advance. And if you're setting up this with a student for the first time, it's good to try and start 5 minutes early just to iron out technology issues. Okay, I'm going to go through some of these fairly quickly just so I have saved some time for questions. I already covered this a little bit before, interpersonal interactions. It's harder to communicate and harder to notice subtle cues from students. Like, sometimes teaching really relies on us noticing exactly how a student responds to something, so we can tell the difference between the student feeling neutral, feeling good, feeling joy, feeling frustration, feeling annoyance, there's all those things that we can kind of tell in person that are harder to tell over a screen. I find that to compensate for that, I just need to be willing to ask questions more directly, and to gauge and understand where the students are in their feelings and their knowledge. And it's hard because you don't want to ask them in a way that sounds too naggy or like you're angry or something. It takes some skill to do it. I find it helps just to remember to keep a smile on your face. It's harder for it to feel like you're angry if you're smiling at them too. Yeah, but just being more precise and clear on these things, I find helps with that. I also mentioned this a little bit earlier too, in teaching technique. We so often demonstrate through live, playing for the student in our studio, or even like guiding their hand through certain things by holding their wrist or things like that. And we can't do any of that now. First of all, we can demonstrate technique visually over the video. And that's why it's good for everybody to have the larger screen so you can see it somewhat clearly. Might be prepared to exaggerate these gestures more than usual so that they translate across the visual, across the screens. And we also need to use especially precise, clear, evocative language. And the example I had here is like in Bach's A minor two-part invention, like to imagine your hands are two monkeys swinging around vines together in the jungle, for instance, in the spots where there's trickier counterpoint going on. Teaching musicality and tone. As I've said many times, internet audio is not great, generally. It flattens much of what we hear in person that we would describe as musicality and tone differences or dynamics. And so I find we have to ask the student what they are hearing themselves do more than we usually would. And I find that I'm playing more demonstrations for my students and kind of longer demonstrations than usual too, just so that they have a chance to hear these things. And the more precise and evocative language you can use helps a lot in teaching these things online. Okay. So I already mentioned this one earlier. I'm just going to skip it now for time. For theory, listening, and composition assignments, I spend extra time crafting these assignments outside of lesson times. And for some things I create, or I'm going to create some videos that all my students can share. And for written work, I ask my students to send me their work in advance of the lesson, just so I can have a chance to look things over. And that helps save time during these remote lessons. For adapting events, Skype or Zoom can both be good for things like master classes, syllabus exams. With Zoom, there's a time limit of 40 minutes for groups larger than 3 if you have the free plan. If you get any of their paid plans, including the cheapest one, then that limit goes away, and you can have events for up to 24 hours with groups up to 100 people. So that could cover recitals. For studio recitals and that kind of thing, I've actually found a second option to be what I do and to be the best. I do pre-recorded and then streamed on YouTube in order to have higher sound and video quality, and it also avoids any internet and equipment problems that can happen in real time. I found that much better solution than doing something live, because everybody's internet connection is different, their technology at home is different, so you get a very variable recital that could include crashes and freezes and all that kind of stuff. So the pre-recorded thing, I think, works a lot better. All right. So modern technology allows us to teach remotely with relative ease, at least, even though there's a lot of challenges to it. And the more imagination you bring to this, the more it can feel like your own thing rather than something that we're being forced to do. And that always helps, I think, with morale and creativity and feeling like this is really something that we're doing. Okay, and then this was from my previous one. We're already in a Zoom session. So now I'm going to stop this share and come back over here. All right, so why don't we switch? Let me see if I can unmute people. Okay, so I think the best thing to do might be, if you have a question or anything you want to ask me about, you can unmute yourself and ask the question, and then I can address it.
Steve, you talked about how challenging it is to be sitting in that awkward position. And I found that at the end of lessons, I was facing my piano, but then I was turning like this to look at the camera, and oh man, I had a twitch in my back. And Charisse, who's on this call, said she was standing for part of her lessons. And I found that all you have to do is adjust that angle of the laptop or the tablet. And so I start standing, and usually by the end of the day, I'm back to sitting. You can make small adjustments to, like you said, taking care of your body is really important.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Because if you have a laptop, it is easy to adjust the angle slightly, so you can stand up and move around a little bit. I think in exercise and health for the body, it's like even if you move a little bit, it helps a lot rather than being frozen in one spot. And then one thing you said, Susan, about, I think you made it even clearer that, when I said earlier, like, it's good to fully turn towards the piano and turn towards the camera with your whole body to avoid twisting your torso. The more that you twist your upper body, the more likely you are to cause pain or stress to things. Yeah. Some other questions, or feel free to contribute your own thoughts too, if you feel like there's stuff that yeah.
I'd like a little more information on how to stream YouTube videos. I would know, and my students would know, how to record themselves. But then can that be played through Zoom if you have a recital with people collected on Zoom? How do you go about putting that together for a recital?
So for what I do with my studio recitals now is I don't I don't send it through Zoom or Skype. What I do is I collect the videos that my students make of themselves, their own recordings of their recital piece or pieces, and then I create a private YouTube playlist, and I upload all the videos onto YouTube, and then the videos then are available, but I tell my students that we're all going to watch them at like 2 p.m. on a Saturday or something. And so we still have the communal experience of watching each other's videos, but it's all through YouTube. So it's not having, I don't send it back through Zoom or anything. Um, I think there are some ways to make that work, but they're kind of complicated. And I think if your recitals tend to have a interactive component, like you like students to talk to each other between pieces or at the end, switching over to Zoom can work, especially at the end of the recital. Like you can have a little online Zoom reception or something. Um, I think it's possible, if you want to stream YouTube through Zoom, that you can use that through the share screen function and enable sharing computer audio as well. Um, I just feel like probably the simpler thing is just to use YouTube when it's the YouTube part and then switch to Zoom later on, like to have a separate Zoom meeting scheduled for your studio to have a virtual reception or something. Does that help?
Yes, that does. It does. I have piano parties once a month and the students get together and play for each other, and we actually play games
Ah,
together. So I'm assuming that would only be possible with Zoom. You couldn't do the combo.
yeah, I don't think it would be. So with YouTube, there's two ways that you can have videos up on YouTube. There's you can pre-record a video and upload it onto YouTube, and or you can record live into YouTube, um, so that you can like be filming a live event or a concert or something. But that's only from one person. So I think one person at a time could stream a live performance video through YouTube. But then you'd have to switch to each other's student for each subsequent YouTube live stream. I think
Hmm.
for something that's maybe like the kind of studio party you're talking about, like a monthly, that kind of thing, Zoom itself would probably make more sense just
Hmm.
by itself. Um, and rather than trying to involve YouTube for that, I think it would be probably wouldn't actually work for that because of how the live YouTube live works.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Uh, when they are recording their performance for a YouTube upload, how do you make sure that the hands are not reversed? Because I've had a student make a recording on YouTube, and this was her. I mean, the hands were backwards. Does that happen to you?
Um, eh, None of my students did that, but it has happened to me when I've tried my own recordings. Especially, I didn't show it in my presentation, but I actually also installed a webcam above my piano to get a top-down view of the keyboard. And if I open QuickTime on my iMac on my MacBook to do a video recording, if I don't remember to switch to say to show the mirror image of what it's showing, then it has my hands backwards. And I'm not sure why that's the setting on these cameras. I think the thing to do to avoid that is to communicate with the student or their parents to make sure that that setting is correct in whatever they're using. Um, there may also be a way using something. Well, I imagine with a program like QuickTime or some other cheap or free video programs on computers, it would be fairly easy just to, once you already have the video, to then go in and switch it to have it flip it around. The same way that you could if you had a photo that you wanted to just reverse backwards. But I'm not sure how that would work. It may even be possible once you've uploaded, if you're using YouTube for a studio recital, once you've uploaded a video onto YouTube, YouTube itself it has like a place where you can edit the video to some extent, and it may have an option for just putting it back the right direction. But I think the first step is to talk to the students and the parents and ask them to make sure that it's the right direction when they're doing it.
Yes.
And it's always good there, to tell them to have have them do like a short segment first, just so they don't record the entire piece, feel good about it, and then realize it's backwards, just so they can fix that setting before making the video. That's always the best thing to try.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, we had a workshop last month on a program called Filmora, FILMORA 9, and it's a program where you can take all of your videos and put them together into one great big recital. You can put the titles in between each one of them and then send it to YouTube, so it would be one great big recital.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds really useful. That's, yeah, I use some of the Adobe programs like Premiere Pro to do that kind of thing sometimes. Yeah, but that sounds a lot easier to use than those bigger programs.
We're going to be using our ensemble festival recitals that way, so that each ensemble can be linked all into one great big program.
That sounds really nice. Yeah, I'll look into that myself too. I think I've just been putting the video separately on YouTube. That way, well, it was just simpler. But this Filmora sounds like a nice thing to try, because that's a very useful function that can make it seem a lot more well produced and meaningful and all that. Yeah, thank you for that.
I've got another one.
Uh-huh.
Could you elaborate a little more? You mentioned sending practice sheets via Microsoft. What was the app you mentioned? OneNote. OneNote. Could you elaborate a bit on how you do that?
Sure. Yeah, I can actually show you what I do. Let me just open that program, and I'll share the screen with all of you again. So, okay, so can all of you see this application here? So this is the Microsoft OneNote. You can see the program name up here. And I think there's a variety of other functions this program is good for, but I use it almost exclusively for making my practice sheets. So here I have a practice sheet for one of my students, Noah, from a couple of weeks ago. And so this is what gets sent to them. And so I have things like the hand-ins that he's working on, Bartok, and his pieces down here, including his assignments. So Noah is a little bit older, so a lot of times for him I don't give very precisely detailed practice segments. I tell him more like sections to work on, especially important musical or technical issues to work on, that kind of thing. And let me find one of my younger students so I can show you more detailed practice sheet that I do sometimes. So here's one of my younger students, Walter. And so here I give him much more precise practice segments. And then I can tell him like how many times I want him to play that segment each day and break things down more. And so in each lesson I can create this fresh. So let me, so I can show you that. What I do is I usually put the date up here and the student's name over there. If I come down here, what I do is I put a table in. And then for the table, I usually put 8 columns, 1 column for the assignments and then 7 for each day. And then I put in the letters for each day of the week: Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then there's a number of rows already. If I run out of rows, I can add more rows up here. And then as lessons going on, I'll take a couple of seconds, you know, to be like 3 octaves, hands together, and then add those things on as I'm going along during the lesson. And then at the end of the lesson, what I do over here, there's this button called Share, and then what I say, send copy of the page, and it says send as a PDF attachment. And for me, I have to go down here to find my actual email program I use. I click that, and it opens up a new message in my Gmail, and then down here is hidden, but the attachment is down there of this PDF. And then I type an email address and I send it off right at the end of the lesson. So that's been quite convenient to do. When I was teaching in person, I at first would write these kinds of things out by hand. But even back when I was in person lessons, I figured out this app, and that worked really well because I could create the same kind of table with practicing segments and practicing assignments during the lesson, and then send it off to them. And it's useful. Most of my students now I've had for a while, so I've kind of stopped doing this, but early on, especially with younger children, it's the kind of thing where like they put the check in each box once they've done it, and then their parents can like initial to verify they've done it, and then give them a sticker, and they feel good about having accomplished what I asked them to do. And yeah, so that's how I use that program for that. If you have a subscription to Microsoft Office, like you have Microsoft Word and like Excel and PowerPoint, then you'll also have access to this OneNote. A lot of people don't know about it, but it's also part of that package, so you can download it and try it out yourself if you already have the other Microsoft programs.
Do you know of anything equivalent with the Apple iOS?
I'm not sure what the Apple equivalent would be. There probably is one. I know that there is a program called Evernote that's similar to OneNote, but that's not necessarily an Apple program, but it has very similar kind of function. But it's probably easy. Let me see. Apple version of OneNote is unclear. I don't think there is one actually. So if you don't want to or can't use OneNote, you might want to explore Evernote. It's a similar type of program. It might be cheaper as a standalone thing than OneNote would be. Aha! Kathleen Galt says that you can use Pages and add tables into the document.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. One thing I like about OneNote, and I think Evernote would be similar, is I could also create tables in Microsoft Word and send those, but the OneNote organizes them in a particular way that's really useful. So, screen share. So in OneNote, over here I have various folders. So each folder is like a student's name. And then when I go into a student's folder, it organizes all of their practice sheets for me already. And so this is something, of course, you could do just by saving files with the right names with Microsoft Word. But that's it does it more automatically here in OneNote, so that you don't have to manage file names to keep everything organized. And so anyway, Pages could do that too. I'm not really familiar with Pages. All right, cool. Other thoughts or questions? Feel free, if you have your own solutions to some of these things, to chime in and share with everybody. I'd be excited to hear too. So I think I may see some people.
Patty needs to unmute. She has a question.
There we go. Yeah. I started typing lesson assignments for my students many years ago on the computer because some of my younger students were having issues with my handwriting, because I use kind of a hybrid of cursive and printed. And so I just finally said, I can type faster than I can write, and it's more legible. And this way I have a copy on my computer. So every student has their own folder on my computer with their lesson sheets. And so I just take when the student comes in the door, or now when I get online with them, I just have their particular lesson sheet open, and I just edit it as we're doing our lesson, with adding new things and taking out the old things, and then I save it with a date and email it to them. And I'm using Word, but you could use, any piece of document software that you wanted.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really handy to have that stuff on your computer, because then if I'm trying to remember all the pieces a student is playing for a festival, I can just look at their most recent sheet, or the one from a year ago if I need to know what they did then, and see what they're doing.
Yeah, it sounds really good. That's another thing I use OneNote for. It's really useful for keeping track of what my students have been working on over time, and I can also kind of analyze how long it took them to learn certain pieces and all that kind of stuff. It's useful. All right, any other questions or any other thoughts?
I'm Peggy McNeil.
Hi.
If you're using your computer already for the video, then what do you type on for the assignment sheet?
So for me, I have my dual setup. So I use my computer for the video, and I use my iPad for the practice sheets. So I'm actually typing on the screen of my iPad, which is not quite as easy as typing on my laptop, but it's not so hard either. And yeah, part of why I have the two computer setup is for that. I think it would be more annoying to have to do both things on the same computer. Not impossible though. I think you could, depending on how your setup is, you could just switch the applications while you're still in a Skype or Zoom meeting, and then type into Microsoft Word or OneNote or Pages or whatever program you're using, and then switch back to the video from there. And I think it also might depend on like what your approach to like an hour of teaching or it really is. And I think I mentioned that earlier too. Like when we're doing video lessons, it feels like we have to be doing something every second of the hour, even though when we're in person, we would take time, for instance, to write stuff down on a practice sheet, or to write into something like that. So I know that like certain doctors who have appointments, like psychologists, for instance, they'll be explicit. They'll say like, when we have an hour-long appointment, what that means is we have 55 minutes, because then the last 5 minutes are for me to write down notes about our meeting, and that's an important part of the meeting too. So maybe, especially if you only have one computer and you can only have one, it could be good to say, like, especially during COVID times when we're doing remote lessons, like an hour-long lesson is really going to be 55 minutes, and then the last 5 minutes, I'll spend writing the practice sheet up and sending it along to the parents. So that could be a way around that problem. Since I have both, I just use both as it goes along. So that might be a way to adapt that part. You're welcome. All right, other questions? Other thoughts?
I think it's been a really informative and helpful hour or so with you, and we really appreciated you putting this all together.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for saying that. I feel like I'm trying to figure all this out too at the same time. And
we're all learning as fast as we can.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if people will continue with remote lessons more even after it's generally safe to go back to in-person lessons again.
No more snow days.
Yeah, that's part of why I offered to do this topic, because I was already teaching a student in San Diego and a student in Corvallis and a student in Chicago. So I was already doing remote lessons every week for years. So I was used to it with all of my setup. And then it was everybody. Wasn't quite as hard for me to transition because I was already kind of doing that for some people. Yeah, but thank you. It's really nice to see all of you, and this, hopefully next time I see you, maybe you'll be in person and it'd be safe to be in person.
That would be great.
Yeah.
And it was fun to have people from 2 different states and several different districts all here together.
Yeah.
So I will make this recording available somehow, and Steve will give me the PowerPoint so we can also make that available. It may be in the members only part of our website, or we'll figure that out soon, but we'll get that information to the presidents of both districts, and then they can let their folks know.
All right.
Thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Stephen. We appreciate this. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. It's great to give you guys a talk again, and hope to see you again sometime soon.
Yeah, indeed. Bye all.
All right. Bye.
Bye, everybody.